All right, hello. Hope everybody's doing good today. Talk about this book here. This is kind of the focus of today's discussion. I'm going to get into the Arthurian romances, specifically the quest for the Holy Grail. And I'll do kind of a little bit of a background on that because I have read most of the major Arthurian Grail romances. There's going to be a little bit of discussion about Francis Ford Coppola's film Apocalypse Now, because this book was cited for that film when they were writing the screenplay. I believe was John Milius. I know he wrote the screenplay with Francis Ford Coppola, and he compared the film to being a Grail quest without a Grail. So the book kind of adds an extra layer of complexity to that film, because that film is already based in part on Joseph Conrad's novel The Heart of Darkness. It contains some Nietzschean themes. I'm sure that stuff came from the mind of John Milius, because he calls himself what is it that John Milius calls himself? A Nietzschean Zen master or something? I don't know. Anyways, if you've ever seen The Big Lebowski, John Goodman's character in that movie is based on John Milius. John Milius, the director who directed such films as Red Dawn and Conan the Barbarian, wrote the screenplay for Apocalypse Now. We're talking a little bit about John Boorman's Excalibur, because that also lends reference to this book. John Boorman heavily used From Ritual to Romance by Jessie Weston and the construction of that film. So let's get into it. I'll read the back cover to you, because I think that's probably a good place to start what this book is about. So Jessie Weston was a kind of medieval historian who she translated some Arthurian romances. I know she did a translation. I think she did a translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, but this is the book that she's most famous for. So I'll read this. Jessie L. Weston, From Ritual to Romance. By the way, this book is in the public domain. If you want to read this for free, you can find it on Project Gutenberg. But here we go. From Ritual to Romance, best known as the book which inspired the basic symbolism of T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, Jessie Weston, From Ritual to Romance is in its own right a classic of modern thought. An eminent medieval scholar, Miss Weston had the genius to apply the great insights of Sir J.G. Fraser's Golden Bough to the study of the mysterious legend of the Holy Grail. So the Golden Bough is kind of a comparative religion study / anthropology text. It's multi-volumes. How many volumes are in the Golden Bough? I think there's like 11 or 12 volumes in that set. Most people that read it, when they do read it, they read the abridged single volume version. There is a scene in Apocalypse Now where Colonel Kurtz, his library, you see this book and the Golden Bough together. In fact, there is some poetry reading by Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando in that film. I believe he's reciting The Hollow Man by T.S. Eliot. But this book was an inspiration on T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, as I just read. The Golden Bough inspired this book. This conjunction of the discoveries of cultural anthropology and the literature of the medieval legend and romance has been rich in its fruits in later criticism and in the work of a whole generation of poets and writers since 1920, when this book was published. Towards the end of Jessie Weston's life, I think she died in 1927. So she was, I don't know. This was towards the end of her career. The archetypal events and symbols of the Grail legend. Okay? The Waste Land, the freeing of the waters, the Fisher King, the Medicine Man, the Hidden Castle, the mysterious feeding vessel, the Bleeding Lance and Cup, the Perilous Chapel, are seen as romantic transformations of ancient and deeply significant nature rituals, which have analogs in the myths and rituals of Tammuz and Adonis, Mithra, and Attis. Now, this is Jessie Weston's thesis, what she set out to prove here. Okay, there are fascinating excursions into questions of magic, the symbolism of the tarot cards, and other related subjects. So, yeah, there's a chapter in here where she talks about tarot cards and tries to make connections to hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt. And then she also talks about like how the symbols or the pictures on the tarot seem to be related in some way to the Grail romances, the Arthurian Grail romances. So maybe for those of you that know nothing about Arthurian Grail romances, which what she's talking about, I have them sitting on my shelf down here, so we'll go through them. She's talking about the medieval Grail romances, starting here with Chrentien de Troyes. This is a 12th century set of Arthurian romances. What most people are familiar with in the Arthurian legend, when they think about it or talk about it, is this: Sir Thomas Mallory's La Morte d'Arthur, the death of King Arthur. This was published in 14. I can't remember. It was pretty late. Was it like 1485? It's 15th century. Okay. So what Sir Thomas Mallory did was he took a bunch of these pre-existing Arthurian legends from, the whole span of since they first appeared. When you look at Geoffrey of Monmouth's British Kings and Ninnius and all these early sources, King Arthur, going down through these Grail romances, Sir Thomas Mallory tries to like codify all of them into a single unified text. So you get the birth of King Arthur, Merlin, all the way through Arthur's death. Point being, this is a very late development as far as the Arthurian legends are concerned. And that's why, Jessie Weston here, she does mention Mallory, but she kind of refers back to some of these earlier texts, like Percival, which is the fourth one. This is the story of the Grail or Parzival. It's an uncompleted text. It's not finished. Chrentien de Troyes died before he finished his poem. So I think there's 4 Grail continuations of other writers that came after him that tried to finish his story. So there's an appendix in this Penguin Classics edition that kind of gives a summary of these 4 continuations, right? One of them, Sir Gawain, kind of becomes the central character in the first of the endings. And Jessie Weston here, okay, that's one of the things that she gets wrong, is that she thinks that this Gawain continuation predates the version done by Chrentien, where Percival is the Grail Knight. And modern scholars have, kind of faulted her on this. So she thinks that Sir Gawain, is the original Grail quester, and she is wrong on that. So a lot of the information in her book has kind of been discredited by modern scholarship. But that doesn't mean the book's without value. There's still some good stuff in here. I think the comparative chapters where she compares the various Grail legends is probably the strongest suit of the book. So you got Chrentien de Troyes. This is 11th century. Okay, or I rather not 11th century, but late 12th century. Okay, this also is late 12th century. This is a follow up. So you had Chrentien, then you had Robert de Boron, another French writer, who does his version, which he titles Merlin and the Grail. This is in 3 parts. The trilogy, you have Joseph of Arimathea. This is kind of like where the story of the Grail gets explicitly Christianized. In Chrentien, the Grail is like a platter or a almost like a serving dish, and here it specifically becomes the cup that was used by Christ at the Last Supper. And then Joseph of Arimathea uses the cup to catch the blood of Christ. So this is where it kind of really takes on like it's Christianized, kind of becomes like Christian folklore at that point. Okay, this begins with the birth of Merlin. So Merlin's backstory: Merlin is the product of a union between a woman, a Christian woman, who is impregnated by an incubus, and so Merlin is born like a demon child. Okay, but she takes the child and has the child baptized, and so Merlin becomes like this figure who's, I don't know, he's like, it's very strange. It's interesting. It's an interesting backstory to Merlin. He's not human. He's like, what would you call it? Like a Nephilim, right? He's a Nephilim. Then so you got Joseph Arimathea as the first part, then you got the story of Merlin, then you have Percival. And this is where you get the whole idea that the Grail was taken by Joseph of Arimathea, who's in the Bible, placed Jesus in the broad tomb, and wrapped him in the linens along with Nicodemus and buried him. And then the cup is brought to England, to Britain. It's not England yet, but Britain during the time of the Roman legions, when they're still there, or shortly before they leave. You're talking like 6th century, right? Like 512 AD, somewhere in there, somewhere around in there. I don't have the exact dates, but the Roman legions withdraw. The Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons are invading. You've got like Picts and Scots and people coming down in, and that's the time of King Arthur, right? That's where the original Arthurian stories come from. So that takes it all and ties it all the way back. So we've talked about Chrentien briefly, Joseph or Robert de Boron. Then we have a Germanic telling. This one is Parzival by Wolfram von Eshchenbach. So you see that the original Grail hero in the version by Chrentien and the version by Robert de Boron, and now the version by Wolfram von Eshchenbach. This is Germany. So these are French. This one is I think this is 13th century, early 13th century. Wolfram von Eshchenbach was a knight, okay, and a kind of like, troubadour. This one's different because the Grail is a stone. It's a stone. It's very strange. There is some speculation that it might be some sort of rock that fell out of the sky. It's like a blue stone. But anyways, I did a whole commentary or summarization of this a couple of years ago. There's a playlist for this where I went through this chapter by chapter and talked about it. So these are like kind of the major ones. There's another one down here that I have. It's part of like the Latin Vulgate cycle. This is the Quest of the Holy Grail, which Miss Weston talks about. Although she kind of discredits this one and says this one's not not of much use. She kind of poo-poos this. This was written by a 13th century Cistercian monk anonymously, and in this version of the Grail legend, the questing knight is no longer Percival, it becomes Lancelot's son, Galahad. There is another major Grail romance, which I don't have, which is Percivalis. It's kind of its own thing. At some point, I do plan on reading it, but I just haven't got around to it yet. So, of the major Grail legends, we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4. There's like 5 major ones. I've read 4 of them. Okay, so this one is, this one's weird. This one's kind of like the one that Mallory is spinning off of in, The Death of King Arthur. So we've gone through that, and I think that this book, if you, is probably where my favorite or the most valuable chapters to me were the comparisons that she does between the various Grail legends. She picks out the elements that are common to all of them, and then she comes up with like the task of the hero. That's one of the chapters in here, is by doing a comparison of the major Grail romances to find out what are the key details of these that they share in common. The Fisher King is going to be common to all of them, right? So the Fisher King and the Waste Land, 2 prominent features, are going to be important to Miss Weston. She's laying it out before she really starts to develop her thesis. And it's the Fisher King is this figure who is wounded, usually someplace in his, his nether regions. He is rendered infertile. It's kind of like usually some sort of euphemism for he's impotent, right? And then the land is laid waste as a result, because for Jessie Weston, when she's looking at these Arthurian romances, she sees that there's this bond between the king and the land. This is what John Boorman's spinning off of in his movie Excalibur. In Excalibur, which is a mythic telling of the Arthurian story, John Boorman takes this character of the Fisher King and makes a composite character. He combines Arthur and the Fisher King together into one character. So throughout the film, this theme of the king and the land are one. That is a kind of central aspect of the Grail legends, is that when the king becomes sick or old or becomes impotent and infertile, the land is connected to the king, and therefore whatever happens to the king happens to the land. So if the king becomes infertile or old or decrepit, then the land suffers as a result. If the king succeeds, the land blossoms. If the king fails, the land suffers along with him. So it's the task of the Grail Knight in these various stories to heal the king. So here, from one of the later chapters of the book, Jessie Weston puts it this way. In the previous chapters, we've discussed the Grail legend from a general rather than a specific point of view. So she's talking about the various Grail legends that I've held up and shown to you. She says, we have endeavored to ascertain what was the real character of the task imposed upon the hero, and what the nature and value of his achievement. We have been led to the conclusion that the achievement was, in the first instance, of an altruistic character. There was no question of advantages, temporal or spiritual, which should accrue to the quester himself, but rather of definite benefits to be won for others. The freeing of a ruler and his land from the dire results of a punishment which, falling upon the king, was fraught with the most disastrous consequences. for his kingdom. We have found further that this close relation between the ruler and his land resulted in the ill of one becoming the calamity of all, is no mere literary invention, but it is proceeding from the fertile imagination. No, it's no mere literary invention proceeding from the fertile imagination of a 12th century court poet. So she's talking about Chrentien de Troyes, the originator of the Grail romances, but a deeply rooted popular belief of practically immemorial antiquity and inexhaustible vitality. We can trace it back. Now, this is her thesis. We can trace it back thousands of years before the Christian era. We find it fraught with decisions of life and death today. So, she says, further, we find in that belief a tendency to express itself in certain ceremonial practices which retain in a greater or less degree the character of the ritual observances of which they are the survival. So what she's getting into, or her hypothesis or thesis, is that these Arthurian romances that come from the 12th and 13th century actually find their inception in pre-existent, pre-Christian, pagan nature cults, fertility cults. She goes to lay out the various symbols, the cup, the spear, because you talk about the spear of Longinus is a common feature in the Grail story. One of the points of contention that I have with her, she kind of dismisses the spear as being a Christian symbol, but I don't think I'm going to get into all that today, but she sees the cup and the spear as the spear being a phallic symbol and the cup being a a receptive symbol. So she just makes this logical leap, and I don't know what this is based upon. It's kind of a non sequitur, right? This is one of the faults of her scholarship here, is that she makes these claims, but she doesn't really have a lot of evidence to back it up. And that's why a lot of the modern scholarship kind of frowns on or dismisses her. So I would say I kind of agree with that, with the scholarship consensus, is that this is not really great. It's kind of makes a lot of just claims without providing evidence. Trying to link the Grail hero and his task to all sorts of sources, whether it be Adonis, Tammuz, Mithra. She even brings in at one point like the Rig Veda and kind of compares Parzival to this character named Indra from like Indian, I'm talking about India, right? Like from those sources. So she's all over the map. But yeah, it's still an interesting read. Now, I will say this, getting into this. If you want to understand kind of like what's going on in John Boorman's Excalibur, it's coming from this text. All right? And the two sources that Boorman says he uses are the death of King Arthur and this. I would not even agree that he's using this so much. Boorman's pulling from like all of the Arthurian sources and kind of like doing his own thing, right? He's even pulling from, Alfred Lord Tennyson's The Idylls of the King here, right? So, yeah. As far as Apocalypse Now is concerned, Apocalypse Now also draws from this, but it's more explicitly pagan. Okay? You have in that movie the Colonel Kurtz character. We'll get into a discussion of the film. If you haven't watched Apocalypse Now and you don't want the movie ruined for you, then I would suggest that maybe, this would be a good place to stop, watch the movie, then come back after you viewed it. But Willard Okay, Captain Willard, played by, in that movie, Martin Sheen, is tasked by a CIA spook to go up the river, Vietnam, set during the Vietnam War, to go up the river into Cambodia and to eliminate, with extreme prejudice, Colonel Kurtz, who has kind of gone off the grid. He set himself up as a deity amongst a tribe of natives in Cambodia. And it's kind of a representation of it's playing off the Grail story. Like I said, Milius said that it was a Grail quest without a Grail. But Marlon Brando's character, Colonel Kurtz, also has set himself up as a type of Fisher King symbol. It's clear that he's wounded or rendered, I don't know, I don't think he's mad. He's not gripped with madness. The fact that they show the text that he's reading, which is exactly this copy, you see it in the film for just a second. He's reading the Golden Bough and Ritual to Romance, shows that this is a intellectual man. But so I don't think he's crazy, but he set himself up as like this ruler of these people. And it's kind of the wasteland motif, you know. This is not a good place. He's got dead bodies and, you know, severed heads and stuff all around him, and he's kind of taken on that role that the king and the land are one. That same theme that you find in Jessie Weston. So because he's like kind of degenerated or suffering, then the tribe of people that he's with, the land around them, has become kind of a reflection of his own psyche, his own shattered psyche. So Willard in the film has been tasked to go up the river and kill this guy. Now, a lot of people said they don't like the end of the movie. I believe that Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel hated this film. Roger Ebert liked the movie, but if I remember correctly, he didn't like the ending too much because it didn't make a lot of sense. Well, if you've read Jessie Weston, the ending of the film makes sense because there's a portion in here where in some of these other cults or kind of like pagan non-Christian sources, the task of the quester, or if the Fisher King figure becomes impotent or unable to rule, then another person will then ritually slay him and take his place as the new king. And then you have like this cycle of renewal. So it's these various legends, it's like a series of death and resurrection, or that type of thing. So it's a almost like a wheel, if you will, a wheel of time. I mean, I'm thinking that probably Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, maybe he even read this and borrowed from it. I'm starting to suspect that, having completed this. But yeah, that's why the end of Apocalypse Now results in kind of a real life sacrifice of like a bull at the end of the movie. That was not made up for the film. That was really a tribe of people doing like a pagan ritual. And the two events, Willard killing Kurtz, so the questing knight, if you will, instead of healing the Fisher King, kills him and takes his place, coincides with the slaying of this bull by these tribes people. And when you see Willard come out, it's almost like the tribe people, they don't try to kill him or anything. It's almost like they regard him as their new leader. He has renewed the land and become the new ruler. At least that's the way I'm interpreting it, if you're basing it off of Weston's anthropological study here. So really don't have a whole lot else to say about this, because if I go on any longer, I'm going to lose all interest. This is my second attempt at this, and I've barely scratched the surface on delving into what I think are the real origins of the Arthurian legend as far as the Grail, the Holy Grail portion is concerned. And just very briefly, I'll say that it has to do a lot, in my opinion, with Crusades, the Crusaders from the West coming to the East. These Grail romances all pop up or begin to pop up in like the 12th and 13th century. That coincides with the Crusades that are taking place as Crusader knights from the Latin West are coming east. I believe it also coincides with liturgical reforms that are taking place in the Western Church, as far as Rome. Kind of the influence of the Frankish court, Charlemagne's court. Charlemagne came to power or was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in 800. And then shortly thereafter, you get these reforms that take place in the West, such as no longer using the elements of bread and wine for your Eucharistic rites, but the cup, the wine being denied to the laity. That's a practice that starts to become widespread during the same time period that the Crusades are taking place. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. The debates on the nature of the Eucharist. Transubstantiation is codified by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. Again, these debates are taking place around the same time that these Arthurian Grail romances are all coming out. So Jessie Weston does have something to say about the Byzantine liturgy in Ritual to Romance, but I'm not going to get into it today. She gets into the story of Longinus and like rejects that it has any impact. Specifically, she talks about the Holy Spear. She says the critics. Okay, what does she say? She talks about the spear that's used in the Byzantine rite or the Eastern Orthodox liturgy. What of the Byzantine Mass? Do we not find there a spear connected with the chalice? I very much doubt whether we do. The so-called Holy Spear of the Byzantine and present Greek liturgy is simply a small silver spear-shaped knife, nor can I discover that it was ever anything else. So, I'm not going to go into all that. She clearly has never read the commentary of St. Germanus of Constantinople, where he talks about the lance that's used in the Byzantine liturgy. It's a 8th century document. I have a copy of it in my shelf. It's been put out by Popular Patristics. So you can read that 8th century commentary. She might not have had access to it. So there's more scholarship that's become available, since she wrote this in 1920. I don't think that she ever had access to, for instance, the letter of Gregory of, or the sermon of Gregory of Referendarius concerning the Mandilion, the holy image made without hands, and its connection to King Abgar of Edessa, who I believe is probably the prototype, the Christian prototype for the Fisher King motif, but that's a story for another day. I'm going to wrap things up here for you. If you would be interested in talking more about this Arthurian gobbledygook, let me know, and any interest that you have on this, and maybe I'll do another follow-up video to this, but I guess I'm going to leave it there because if I go any longer, I'm going to lose everybody. So for the 3 of you that stuck it out this far to the end, I hope that you got something out of this. I didn't even talk about the connections of this book to Mary Zimmer Bradley's The Mist of Avalon, which I'm currently reading. So maybe when I talk about that book, we'll dip back into this book. Maybe talk a little bit about Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time as well. Thank you for watching. And as always, have a wonderful day.